Hi everyone, my name's Emily, I'm a writer. This is part 2 of my book vlog review series, a bit of a tongue twister, I know. And in these videos you'll be able to get a little bit of a slice of my opinions on some of the books I've read and be able to find out whether or not they are worth you to read and whether they're for you. Last video looked at The Incest Diary, a very controversial book from last year. You can find the link to that video below in the comment section. I feel like you can't be a YouTuber until you go that to the comment section. It's just what you gotta do. And today we are going to be looking at a book that I've actually been talking about quite a lot recently for some reason. It seems to have popped up into all my conversations, and it's a book that I am very conflicted about. In hindsight, I personally wouldn't read it again, and it was one of those books where I kind of held it up to the sky, screamed manically and threw it to the floor, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'm not mad, I promise. So this book is, drumroll please, American Psycho. So it is a classic. And that in some terms isn't a good thing. I find that there's some books far better, and you should probably spend your time focusing on them rather than some of the classics. That's my own opinion. I love some classics, but this one, I can't really decide. So, this book is written by Bret Easton Ellis and was published in 1991. It is part of the banned book series. For those who don't know, the banned book series, although they're not necessarily banned now, well, in some countries they still are, they are a collection of books that were, when they were published, seemed so controversial and so unfit and inappropriate that they were considered banned. In this series you can also find Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov and Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, both which I will probably discuss later are good and bad for different reasons. So American Psycho is a very interesting read, and it is triggering. I'm going to use that word a lot because it seems that this book and the last book I reviewed are really graphic in their own right for different reasons. Where The Incest Diary was really graphic in a sexual nature, this is really graphic in a violent way. There's some really graphic images in this that you won't see in the film. So if you have seen the film and you haven't read the book, then the plot's very similar and they follow a similar grain. However, there are some scenes in this book that will shock you. So we'll talk a little bit about the film first before I go on to the book. So the film and the book both cover the story of a young stockbroker called Patrick Bateman, living in 1980s Wall Street. And both the film and the book look at the toxic masculinities as well as the characters' insecurities. As such, spoiler alert, all of the graphic scenes and violent tendencies are all in his head as a form of reclaiming his power within the world he lives in. In the film there's a really good scene, it's also in the book, but I think the film really captivates it really well with the business cards. If you haven't seen it, there's a group of men and Patrick is part of this group, and they're all holding up their business cards and like looking at them going, oh, this is a really good business card, it's really thick and glossy, and oh, look at the texture. And the book kind of describes that scene in like 20 pages. It really goes on, and this book does drag on a bit too long, I find. It could probably be about that, really. You could cut most of this. But the film does it really well, and this kind of epitomizes the whole film and the whole book and the plot of American Psycho. He's got everything going for him. He's a player, he's attractive, he's clever, he's wealthy. However, he's still the omega in his group. And that's really interesting to look at. It's really fascinating, and you can see parallels between then in the 1980s to now in some subsets of masculine groups. The film I personally didn't really like. I prefer the book, but the book was long and tedious. It's interesting. Bret Easton Ellis has a really good way of describing things. However, I feel like he can cut them down. So in some ways the film is more concise, while the book kind of diverges into all these different routes that you can really just narrow down into one. So the film kind of ends with this weird scene of Christian Bale kind of looking down a corridor at an exit sign, as far as I can remember, and it kind of goes all distorted, and that's the end of the film. Insinuating that it's a dream sequence, which it is, which is the most cop-out answer to a plot ever. For anyone who writes, who's watching on this, don't ever use the Deus Ex Machina plot twist or it was all a dream, because it's just lazy story writing. And this is a classic which is just lazy story writing, and it really upsets me because Bret Easton Ellis, although has written this beautiful book with some great descriptions, just goes, oh, it was all a dream, there you go. I don't care, who cares? And it really bothered me because I was reading through this, and you know, it was long and tedious. The chapters are quite far apart, and the narrator is long and he drones. And then when I got to I got to about halfway and was like, I just got to finish it. I've invested too much time into this. I've got to continue. So I continued, and then I got to the end, and I was just like, oh, so it was nothing. All of that was just for nothing. And of course it's not for nothing. Of course there is some symbolism into it and some key messages that Bret Easton Ellis conveys. However, as an audience member rather than a literary critic, I do have to look at my enjoyment of the book. And if it's long and tedious and I haven't got a sense of contentment at the end, then what was it for? From an audience perspective, I wouldn't necessarily read this as if I were you. However, if you are a literary critic or a literary student, it's definitely worth a read. Definitely to see the world that Bret Easton Ellis conveys and the messages he tells, as well as the description. The description is something to really look at. So this is probably the biggest feature that I can really hone in on from American Psycho. He explains some really graphic scenes, and there's one where the main character stabs a homeless guy in the eye, he slits open the dog's belly, he puts a pipe inside a woman and puts a rat through it and it eats through her, and it's really graphic and it makes your skin crawl. And I was reading it like, oh, I can't, but how he describes it is so vivid and so mesmerizing from a writer's perspective that I just had to keep reading. And that I think is really interesting. So I would read this if you are a writer, a literary critic, a literary student. You can get a lot from the description, you can get a lot from the world he creates, and as well how he balances this sort of dreamscape and reality and how he blurs the two. And I think that's a really interesting thing to look at in its own right. And throughout the whole book until the end, you're kind of teetering between what's real, what's not. Has he actually done that? How is he getting away with it? And how he unravels that is really interesting. To start with, he tortures a lot of prostitutes, so you don't really see much repercussions from that. Then kills one of his co-workers, and then from there it starts to unravel, and his mind and his sanity starts to unravel too, which is really fascinating. I do find the twist is portrayed better in the film, how it all comes out as drawings rather than just like hallucinations that goes, ah, that's a dream, who cares? So when the secretary in the film finds these sort of morbid drawings, and that I thought was a really nice touch, and what I thought was even a nicer touch was how in these drawings, if you look closer, there's references to some of the deaths in the book. So if you look at the scene, there is the woman with the pipe inside of her. So as gory as that was, I thought it was a nice little Easter egg for us readers. So the narrative structure of the book is really interesting, the messages are interesting, the world's interesting, the description's interesting, but it's a boring read. Shoot me, I mean, some people argue it's a controversial book, some people love it. You know, I can see why. However, personally, I thought it was just tedious. The description goes on for too long and it doesn't have a payoff. It really doesn't, and I feel like I spent a long time picking this up, putting it down again, picking it up, putting it down again, pushing and pushing and pushing to get an ending that just wasn't good enough for me. I don't know how I would have changed it personally. I don't know whether if he would have just got caught and whether it was real, or if there was a better way of portraying this mentality that he has and that it's all a dream sequence. Well, you could always argue as well that perhaps some of it's real and some of it's not, but I personally take of it that all of it was false. All of it was in his mind, and I just don't feel like that was good enough really for 400 pages, and the font is tiny. It's teeny. It's teeny tiny. I mean, it's a classic for a reason, and I think when you read the classics, you must take them with a pinch of salt. They're not going to be as good as you expect them to be. And as well, it's how you approach a book, whether you're a reader or a writer or a critic. If you're a reader, a classic is not going to attract you the same way as it's going to attract a critic. And with many things, how they get the classic status, I think it is because they are remembered. This book is remembered because of its intense and graphic violence, because of its long and intricate and extravagant description. However, it's not remembered for a good, enjoyable read. It's remembered for its concepts. And there's many books that are similar to that, such as The Great Gatsby. I personally don't find it an enjoyable read, but I absolutely love the book because I think Fitzgerald is a mastermind when it comes to imagery and metaphors and portrayal of the American dream. Let me know what you think. Have you read American Psycho? Did you like it? Did you not? Do you agree with any of my opinions? Do you disagree? Put them in the comment section below, send me a message, get involved. And if you have any books that you think need reviewing, any books that you think are similar to American Psycho, send them to me as well. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and links to them are in the description section below. And I will see you soon for more book reviews, misadventures, rantings and ramblings of this South Coast writer.